G'day. If you're in the market for a new ute and you're upgrading from a traditional Australian single cab, space cab or dual cab utility, whether that be BT50, Ranger or Triton, Hilux, whatever, looking to move into a North American truck like a Sierra or a Silverado or a Ram, F250, whatever it might be, what are the differences that you're going to experience? What are some things you want to keep in mind when you're looking to make that transition? I've owned pretty much all of the Aussie variants at some point. I've owned Navara, Triton, Hilux, Rodeo, Colorado, pretty much all of them over time. And I've also owned a couple of US trucks, F250, Ram, and they're very different vehicles. And what I'm constantly struck by is people buying into a US truck. Oh, it's the best thing I've ever done. No regrets. I should have done this sooner. There's no compromise. It's just the best thing I've ever owned. Look, if that's your experience, that's great, awesome. More power to you. However, I think it does oversimplify things. There are some compromises with both, and you want to know what they are before you enter an agreement to actually purchase a US truck or an Aussie dual cab for that matter. Because if you understand the differences, if you understand the compromises that you make and the cost you pay, you'll be a lot more content with your ownership decisions once you've made that decision. So let's get the obvious stuff out of the way. Obviously, this is a lot bigger than this. That's just the way it is. That's pretty straightforward, right? You're dealing with vehicles that are a lot heavier, they're taller, they're wider, they're longer. This is a Ram 3500 and it's a long box variant. So this is pretty much as long a vehicle as you're going to own in this variant, although you can get them wider because this isn't a dually. You can get a dually, and that's excluding obviously variants like the 450 or the 550 or whatever. This is a big vehicle, very, very large, and it contrasts very distinctly with this. I've been in multiple, multi-level car parks in the city in a dual cabin space cab Aussie ute and found it very difficult to park. Found it very difficult to actually get in and out of the car park. With this thing in some of those very tight car parks, it would be an absolute abject impossibility. But having said that, I have parked this in car parks in cities, in very urban areas. But have I taken it into an underground car park? No. Have I done multi-story? No, because I haven't been into a multi-story car park with something like this and been content that this is going to fit in it without a problem at all. Car parks ain't car parks. Some car parks, this fits in very, very easily. I'll give you an example, pretty much any Costco car park seem to have much bigger car parking spaces, probably because of the size of the stuff you need to load in and out of your vehicle. You need a little bit more room. They'll swallow one of these a lot easier, but pretty much no matter which car park I go into, I have to overhang the curb. So I will back in and I will overhang the curb. If I've got two car parks front to back, if I go into one of those, generally I'll overhang. And I've seen lots of US truck owners who park, across the lines and take up two car parking spaces, or a really low blow, in my opinion, is parking in the center of 4 car parking spaces. Don't do that. It's not other car owners' fault that you bought a US truck and your car's just enormous. Don't do that. Park somewhere else and don't take up 4 or 2 car parking spaces. There's no reason to do that, in my opinion. So size is something that you want to take into account. As I've said before, when I go into urban areas, I plan my trip. I work out, is there car parking there? Do I know where I'm going to park this thing? Because the reality is, if you're going to go and visit old Aunt Betty in a very, very narrow street suburban area, this can become quite unwieldy. It just can, in a bunch of very narrow, windy roads, and old Aunt Betty lives at the end of a little cul-de-sac, and it can be very, unwielding if you've got a big party on, cars all parked down the street, just to even turn around. Now the modern ones, this is an older version. for sure, but and some of the modern versions do turn a lot better. That's true. I've driven the current model Ram and the F250 and the Silverado actually, and they do turn a lot better than the old ones, but they still don't turn around as sharp. If you're coming off something like an MN Triton, I've had multiple MN Tritons, and one of the things I really liked about them is they have a kind of a narrow cab and they have the tightest turning circle in their class, which for me on an orchard was great because you could go down between the rows of the trees, turn around at the end, go back down the next row. Very, very convenient. You come off one of those into this, there's going to come times where you just go, oh my goodness, the QE2 would turn around far, easier than this thing. If you're going to jump from something like that into that, you will notice the difference. Now, sure, that comes with the territory. Oh, they're a bigger vehicle. Of course, they're not going to turn as sharp and they're not that bad. Yeah, they're not too bad, but they're just not one of these. They're just not. So, you do have that compromise in them. Now, the thing that's being sold in the main Australia is the 1500, and the 1500 is a little bit of a different vehicle than the 25 or the 3500. They're not really comparable when you compare drive lines and capabilities and such. I mean, even the studs on the wheels are different. Like they're very, very different vehicles. The 1500 is probably the pick of them in terms of size and ability and maneuverability. But having said that, they still don't turn as sharp. They just don't. So you do need to be aware of that, and they're a lot bigger. And you don't really think, if you own a Mazda 6 and you want to just duck into town, you want to go to multi-story car park, or you're staying somewhere and you want to duck into an underground car park, you just don't think about it. You jump in your car and you go. Whereas if you own one of these, you do start to think about where you're going. And it's a compromise. So you do need to be aware of that. And if it's your only vehicle, then, it's not as simple. Like if I'm going away with the kids and I know we're meeting people at a multi-story car park, I won't take that. Because the kids don't want to walk or park further away and then walk all the way back. So we'll go in my wife's car, we'll take the Land Cruiser and we'll just park in the car park, no problem. Now I have seen 1500s parked in a multi-story car park. I've never seen a dually parked in a multi-story car park or a long box, although I'm sure somebody's tried it. But I have seen, for example, at the Sydney multi-story car park at the airport, 1500 parked in there. But the common thing, they were parked way, 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 way away from the terminal, and they were taking up 2 car parking spaces. So anyway, for what it is, that's an obvious one, but it is one to keep in mind. Now, the other obvious one is if you're here in the market looking at one of these, your general reason, not always, but generally your reason to look here is towing capacity. Now, one thing right off the bat, if your towing capacity is 4.5 tons or 7 tons or 9 tons, depending on how big one of these you want to buy, this ain't an option for you. You can't do it. Now, the same restrictions, if you look at a 1500 and you want to tow 4.5 tons, the same restrictions apply to one of these in the current generations if you want to tow 3.5 tons. I maintain, and you can check my other videos out for this, that across time, across circumstance, with accessories fitted and people, a good number of people or a family in the car, you can't do it across time and circumstance. You certainly can't do 4.5 tons towing with a 1500 Silverado or a ASV 1500 Ram. It just can't be done. You just can't get it. There's not enough room in the curb weight plus a driver to pull 4.5 tons. And these things in their current iteration, they suffer the same thing. There's just not enough room across time for you to tow 3.5 tons, notwithstanding the 79 series Land Cruiser. But if we're talking current generation vehicles, let's be honest, the 79 series isn't a current generation vehicle. So look, I think the 79 series has its place, but it's not a current generation vehicle. So if you've got to tow those heavy loads and if it's above 3.5 tons, this is where you're going to look. Now, if you're towing 3.5 tons and you said, look, I've got to tow 3.5 tons once, twice, 3 times, 4 times a year, it's for work, it's only me, there's not going to be anything else fitted in the car or in the ute, and I know I can do it legally even if it is on the limit and it's not big distance, maybe you'll just live with a current generation ute at 3.5 ton towing capacity, and maybe that'll get you by, because you don't see the merit in basically buying 2 of these for one of these, or depending on spec, it might be 3 of these for one of these if you're buying new. So, you know, you want to have a look at, do I really need to tow that heavy load? If you're going to pull, you know, in the high 2s, maybe 3 to push, and you're going to do that regularly, maybe an Aussie Ute will do it for you, and you don't need to go up to this. Look, there is no doubt at all, this is going to tow whatever you've got easier than one of these, all things being legal, right? This is going to do it easier. But it doesn't warrant the extra expense. That's something that you've got to work out. If you are rigid on that, I'm towing above 3.5 tons, this is where you're going to look, because you just can't own one of these and tow more than 3.5 tons. It can't be done. And then you've got, if you're saying, okay, well, maybe I don't need to pull 3.5 tons, well, then you need to weigh it up. And really it comes to question is, how frequently am I doing it? I'm doing it all the time, 5 days a week for work. Maybe that's going to keep the vehicle on its limit, and maybe you want to look somewhere else. But they're things you've got to think about. If you're towing 2 tons, that'll probably do you just fine. You know, high 2s, no problem. But you do need to, you know, you need to figure out how much you're going to do. Do I really need to do this, and how frequently am I going to do it? Okay, they're the obvious things. Then we get into the big thing that kind of always I come back to is cost. You're buying a new one of these, and one of these, this is I understand this is a previous generation Hilux. I'm just using it for the sake of the argument in terms of an Australian single cab, space cab, dual cab, or one of these is the cost. Even if you buy like a 1500 Express, this is a lot more expensive than this in the equivalent, especially when you consider specification for specification. You know, the same spec grade. Even though these are a different vehicle, they're a bit more specialized and they're larger. I get that, but spec for spec, these are a lot more expensive than this. And that's going to have an impact on the cost of capital that you're investing in these vehicles, okay? So if you can get, you know, 3 of these to one of these, or 2 of these to one of these, there's a significant amount of capital that you're tying up in this vehicle. Now, if you can afford that, more power to you, that's great. But regardless, that cost of capital that you have there, that's a real cost to you. Now, whether that be a financed cost, whether that be the cost of what you could otherwise have been paying that off your mortgage, or you could have invested it, or you could have put it into your business, whatever it is, the cost of having that capital rolling in a vehicle, in a depreciating asset, has a cost to you as a person. And you have to factor that in. It's not a small cost. And there's ways to work that out. There's calculators to work that out, which go outside the scope of this video. But that's the thing a lot of people miss. What's my cost of capital to have such a large chunk of my money, or even borrowed money, tied up in this? We'll say, oh, you know, well, the finance cost is this and interest rates are really low. That's one component of it, but it's only one. What's your cost of capital, having capital tied up in this big investment? If you can afford that, you're happy to take the hit on that, that's fine. The other one that's often overlooked is depreciation cost. Now, admittedly, if you've got any sort of diesel utility vehicle, they have some of the best rates of depreciation on the market. That's just the way it is. But I do not subscribe over time. I remember when, you know, this model Hilux came out, and people go, oh, you know, the Hiluxes depreciate less than all the other dual cabs. Multiple people have checked that out, and online there's a couple of commentators that have checked that out. The Hilux is very good for slow depreciation, but having said that, the difference is very marginal in terms of the percentage of depreciation cost on a Hilux compared to another mainstream ute. Let's say Triton, D-Max, stuff like that. Notwithstanding issues like a model being kind of renowned as a bit of a lemon, or one that kind of has reliability issues long term. I'm looking at UD40, or a brand leaving Australia. I'm looking at Colorado, where you might take a sudden abnormal hit on depreciation. If you have a look at BT50, have a look at Ranger, have a look at Hilux, have a look at Triton, their depreciation rates are not greatly dissimilar. Now, at the moment, with the so-called COVID tax, the rate with which consumers are chasing down used cars at the moment is really inflating the prices. But you put that to one side at the moment, that will even out over time for sure. But anyway, over time, at the moment, these look really good because their depreciation rates are very, very slow. But over time, we will see depreciation kick in. And even if these are marginally better than these, the fact of the matter is if you put twice or 3 times as much money buying one of these, let's say you get 20% depreciation on this over a period of years, and over the same period you would have got a 17% depreciation rate on this over a period of, just for argument's sake, 3 years. And then you get a 20% depreciation on this over the period of 3 years. Your total depreciation cost is going to be way higher buying this than this, just because the purchase price is a lot higher. So, and people often don't figure in depreciation cost to buying a vehicle. I do, because it's a tangible cost. And if you had to write out a check every year to cover your depreciation, you'd be a lot more aware of it, and you would consider a lot more robustly, do I want to buy this vehicle as opposed to this one, because I don't want to be having a huge cost of depreciation over time. So just because of that cost of capital, there's a cost of capital in 2 parts. What else could I use this money for in my business, as an investment, off my mortgage, whatever? But also, what's that overall depreciation over, if I'm keeping the car for 5 years, a 5-year period look like? Because if it's 10% a year, just for ease of maths, and I'm spending $140,000 on this car, just for argument's sake, that's a cost of $14,000 a year. And if it was 15% on this, and I was buying it for $50,000, it would be $7,500 a year. Dramatic difference, as you can see. So these are things you want to take into account, and they're all things that add cost to your overall ownership, especially depreciation, because the higher value vehicle you go, and sure, you might be able to write it off through your business or via your tax or whatever, if you're packaging it, it's still a cost. If you buy one of these and you've got a circa depreciation cost of, I don't know, let's say between $10,000 and $20,000 a year, just to be fairly generous, that's all money you've got to replace if you want to replace this vehicle in 5-year time with another new one. So if you're depreciating at a rate, for ease of maths, at $15,000 a year over 5 years, that means you're going to have to cough up $75,000 to jump into a new one. That's how much you've just burnt up in depreciation over 5 years. So these are things that you do want to consider. So they're your first costs. The other costs that are going to be higher, fuel cost is made a big deal of. I would take that as probably one of the least things in cost when comparing these two things. Yes, the fuel rate is not great. This gets me about 11 litres per 100 kilometres. My old Ranger got me about the same. My old BT50 got me about the same. My old Triton was a little better. It was probably around 10, but still 11 to 10, not much in it. That's about what they do. This gets me about 13, right? So 2 litres per 100 kilometres more. And over the course of a year, you're talking a difference of under $500 in terms of my total price at the pump. It is a cost. It is a cost, and I paid out. That's doing about 25,000 Ks a year. It is a real cost. But having said that, it's not a massive cost, particularly this vehicle in second hand. A $500 a year being very, very generous. It's not that high, but just being generous is not that much of an expense in isolation, given the purchase price of the vehicle. So that's the one that people want to know, what's the fuel economy like? And indeed, if you're jumping off a Suzuki Swift into one of these, you're going to feel the bite of the fuel consumption. You're probably going to double it. So you'll notice the difference in fuel economy. But having said that, if you're going from one of these, which is the subject of this video, going from one of these to one of these, yes, if you're watching every penny, you definitely will see it, but it's not a massive cost in terms of total ownership cost of the vehicle. The more pronounced things to me are registration cost. Now, if you're in a weight-based registration environment like I am here in New South Wales, this is going to cost you a lot more than this. And this is a 3500, but I have it registered down-rated as a 4.5 tonne GVM, which means I get it in in the car category. If I registered it as a light rigid and went above 4.5 tonnes, all of a sudden this thing would cost me a lot more. I'd be paying light rigid registration, which is significantly more expensive. That's a cost you would have to factor in if you're either going to buy a 2500 and do a GVM upgrade, or if you're just going to go and buy the 3500 outright, it's going to cost you more. But even if you're coming off a Hilux or a Land Cruiser, this is going to be more to register for you than this. In almost all cases, I can't think of a scenario where this isn't going to cost you more, but there might be one out there. Generally, probably around something of an exemption. But in any event, registration cost is going to be a lot higher. The other thing that's going to be higher is your insurance, and that seems to be getting more scrutinised and, let's say, more expensive potentially as we go along. Seeing more and more people saying, oh, I need some better options on insurance. My insurance premium went up by X. These are a specialty vehicle. It's like, if you've got a Mazda 3 and you change over and buy a Alfa Romeo, the insurance is probably going to go up. Sure, it's a sports car because it's a little bit more, generally I'm assuming it's a sports car that you're buying. Your insurance is going to go up because of the type of vehicle. It's also going to go up because of the potential of incurring costs for the insurer. Repairs are going to be more expensive if something goes wrong. If you get a bingle, the Alfa Romeo is going to cost them more to repair than the Mazda 3, so they're going to charge you for that potential additional cost in your insurance premium. So you want to factor that in. And a lot of people will be pointing people, go to a specialty insurer such as Shannon's to try and get your insurance, and there's nothing wrong with that. But some people are paying an awful lot for insurance on these vehicles because they're specialty vehicles. They're imported vehicles, and sure, we have large compliance volumes, and we're classified as a manufacturer now, and I acknowledge all that, but there's still a specialty vehicle, and insurance is still going to attract a premium over an Aussie Ute. It may not be much, it may be significant. Some people are saying that they've jumped over $1,000 for insurance in each year. You want to check that out. I find it interesting to see how many people buy an F-250 or a Ram or a Silverado and then jump on their online forum and say, oh, I'm just after some insurance, I'm having a bit of difficulty getting it because my insurer for the last 10 years won't insure this. Best to have that sorted out and figure out the cost before you buy the vehicle rather than after, because you certainly shouldn't be driving off the lot without insurance, needless to say. But insurance is going to be more expensive, registration is going to be more expensive, fuel is going to be more expensive. Sorry, I'm using the wrong words there. Should be more expensive, although not hugely, but it will be. But needless to say, if you're going to own one of these over a 10-year period, just in insurance, registration, and let's throw fuel in there as well, just in that alone, it would be very easy for you to rack up a bill of an additional $10,000, let's say $2,000 a year. That would be quite achievable in terms of additional costs over 5 years to own this as opposed to this. And then if you factor in depreciation, the costs and cost of capital, the costs are really going to balloon. Now, you can ignore that, that's up to you, and you can just go, I just want to. Hey, that's fine. People go out and buy Maseratis and they go and buy Ferraris, and it's going to cost them a lot of money to maintain them, it's going to cost a lot of money to insure them, and they do it anyway because they just really, really want it. And if you just really, really want it and hang the cost, that's fine. But you can come unstuck with a bit of a nasty shock later on, stepping into something like this and going, oh, geez, this is actually really expensive to own. Yes, it is. And you don't want that to detract from your driving experience. If you really wanted one, going into it going, yes, I know it's going to be more expensive, but I'm going to do it anyway. That is a lot better place to be, knowing that that's just, you bake that into the cake. That's a better place to be than just going, oh crap, this thing's costing me a fortune. I bought it and now I don't know if I can actually afford to keep it. Not a great situation to be in. Okay, let's talk about some more practical things. How's the ride? Well, the ride in these have really improved, particularly the current generation. This isn't bad, this is a previous generation utility. The current generation's had another step up again, and they're really nice to drive in, getting more and more car-like, although they aren't a car. They're certainly not as comfortable as a Land Cruiser or an SUV or a sedan, because of that back end that's designed to carry the weight in the tray and then on the tow bar as well. They've still got that jitter in them. Some are better than others, but they're more car-like than they've ever been for sure, but they're not a car cars get better as well. These get better. They've narrowed the gap, but there is still a gap to being more comfortable in a sedan. In one of these, look, even the current generation disappointed me a little bit. I thought they'd be better than what they were. Last time I drove a current generation American vehicle, I'd driven there in a buddy of mine's new Ford Ranger Wild Track. I went and had a look at this truck that he was looking at upgrading for. I drove his Ranger on the way up. I drove this new US truck, and it was good. I just didn't feel it was a whole lot better. It felt more planted because it's wider, it's longer. It felt more planted on the road. But in terms of handling, you could feel the jitter in the back end of it. It was still stiff suspension. It's still, you knew you were driving a ute. So, you know, the best of Aussie the traditional Aussie dual cabs, the best of them compared to these in very high spec. I don't see a huge difference. The commanding position, driving position on the road is awesome. It's a lot better in this. That's a big tick. You know, where you sit up, huge big windscreen, big commanding driving position. This is awesome, and you pretty much look down on everyone this side of a B double. That's awesome. It's a really nice place to be from that point of view. The interior is really nice, but the top spec of these utilities, some are better than others, but some of the best of the top spec utes in the current generation are a very nice place to be. Very nice place to be, as are these. The big difference is, you know, in this one in terms of the interior comfort is the space. Bigger seats, bigger cabin, more room, particularly for those in the back seat, but very comfortable driving. Big cabins, and big cabins are more spacious. I remember, you know, jumping from my little MN Triton into my first Land Cruise, and I went, oh, this is just like driving a couch. And it was the size difference on the cabin that gave me that plush feel more than anything else, and the ride and everything, of course, as well. But you know, it was a really distinct contrast going from one to the other. So that's, you know, the comfort overall in terms of ride, I don't really make the massive difference that some people do, but driving position and interior space and the comfort that space provides, yeah, that's a wonderful thing. The best of the best in infotainment and speech and speakers and the stereo system and such, climate controls, the best of Aussie dual cabs and the best of the US ones. There's you know, there's not much in it. Some of the things in these utes I like, you know, storage space under the seats, and some of the Aussie ones haven't, some of them they don't. Some really nifty little features. Lots of room in, you know, huge center consoles, lots of like usable space under the seat, usable space in the flip up in the back. In these ones are really nice little features to have, which just comes with the space, and some clever thinking by the designers. I think that's, you know, a little bit more advanced than what most of the Aussie dual cabs are, and I think that some of the designers for, you know, any of them, D-Max, Hilux, Ranger, BT50, etc., could actually learn a lesson having a look at some of those features of the US dual cabs and bringing them across, just in storage and just, you know, things that are useful in owning a dual cab. I think that would be quite a good thing. You know, even things like, you know, the RAM box option. You know, that's a good thing. Not everybody ticks that box, but some people just love it. But it comes with that huge market size in the US in a very competitive environment, although the dual cab segment in Australia is fiercely competitive and only getting more so. So comfort, you know, you take that as you will. I don't think this is twice as comfortable as these. The best of these is certainly not half as good. There's not that much in it, but the driving position and the interior space is very good. In terms of power, you know, you're not going to get close to the torque that one of these will give you, the pulling power and the overall power. But, you know, these are very good now. Particularly, you've got a lot of engine options now. You've got 6-cylinder options, you've got 5-cylinder options, you've got 4-cylinder options. So however much power you want, you pretty much have a fairly good option with the Aussie dual cabs, up to 3.5 ton towing. You've got all the power that you need in various options there to suit you. But there's more power over here. What does that mean in terms of driving experience? This has oodles of power. It's very heavy. and I have a tendency to take off slower in this. Not that I have to, I just have a tendency to. Just to take off slower and treat it a little bit more gently than this. I don't have to, it's just the tendency I have. I think it's just because it's such a large vehicle. I did the same thing with my Land Cruiser compared to driving this. Whereas this is a lot lighter, it's more nimble, the power is very accessible low down, whereas this is driving on torque. You know, I can stomp the foot and chirp the back tyres if I really wanted to, but I just don't do that. But you could if you wanted to. And I think that's why, you know, one of the reasons why my fuel economy is pretty good. But, you know, it's just something that I tend to do. But the power here is, you know, way higher than over here. But having said that, you've got plenty of power options. And in terms of where the limits of your towing ability and where the limits of the chassis are, you've got all the power you need in one of these up to the limits of what it can tow. So you just have to weigh that up. You know, gearbox options, if you want a manual, you know, you're probably going to come over here. There's not a lot of manual options, but why would you want a manual option? Some people probably do. You know, the F250s, they still do make manuals, but you know, not a lot of them sold. In fact, I don't even know if ASB put that in their options list. But you know, transmission differences. There's a bit of transmission difference. That's a subject for another day in terms of, oh, do I buy Ram or F250 or Sierra or Silverado, or what boxes do I tick for the transmission options? That's a whole nother conversation. There's lots of options here. With these vehicles, ain't no manufacturer giving you an option of different automatic transmissions that you can get, but there are some options depending on the make and model that you're buying in a US truck, but that's a topic for another day. Carrying capacity in the tub, some of these are disappointingly low. You do want to check the payload, because one thing off jumping off one of these, where I live, if you've got a vehicle that has a steel tray on it, the colloquial term for it is a tonner. You know, this comes back from the Holden 1-tonners back in the HQ through WB series. You know, I've had a tray on the back of it, and then later on with the AU Falcons and such, and then Holden made a 1-tonner again later on. But if you had a tray on it, we kind of colloquially refer to it as a tonner. And that's kind of a bit of a yardstick that, you know, as a farmer I use, that, you know, you expect to be able to put a ton on the tray. Now, some Aussie released utility vehicles can still do that quite comfortably, others cannot. Some are better than others. You want to check the specs on these, because some of them are disappointingly low. Some of them you can't get, you know, it's a fair way down from 1 ton, 1 metric ton in the tub. So you do want to be aware of that. And then with some of the larger ones, you can get well over a ton. Even this thing down rated, with me driving it, I can get over a ton in the tub if I wanted to do it, with everything fitted as it is here. With me driving it, I can get well over a ton in it. With this, I can get about a ton, but there are some other variants of US trucks that you won't get a ton in the tub. If that's a requirement for you, you want to check that out, because we generally, I think it's a universality around the world, that we tend, you know, if you've got a ute, you've got a truck, you tend to load it right up. So if it's got a tub, you fill it. You don't fill it 3/4 full, because that's the maximum weight it can carry. If it's got room on the back, you load it right up. So if you're one of those people, or you've got something that you're moving around that is 1 ton, 1.1 tons, and you're looking at a US truck, do check the specifications, because you might be surprised that they don't actually carry 1.1 tons, and depending on your circumstance, that may actually also affect your ability to claim stuff back in your through your business when it comes to tax time. But that's something for you to check out with your accountant. So in terms of carrying ability, you know, just check the specs. Just check the specs. Don't take it as a given that, oh, you know, well, it's a big truck, so it should be able to carry more than an Aussie dual cab. That may actually, it seems counterintuitive, but it might not actually be the case. Servicing. In terms of servicing, this is going to cost you a lot more to service than this. That's just the way it's going to be. That's going to be another thing that you're going to have to factor in. Now, notwithstanding some specialty makes like Volkswagen are generally known, and I'm not trying to throw aspersions at Volkswagen, it just seems to be what Volkswagen owners tell me, that their vehicles are very expensive to service. It's one of the reasons I don't own a Volkswagen. Like if you want to own an Amaric, the servicing can be quite expensive. And indeed, with some of these, they can be quite expensive. I actually got out of a Ford Ranger very early on because I was unhappy with the rate that I was being charged to service it and keep my warranty, particularly after a couple of gearboxes went under warranty, but that's another story. Servicing costs, by and large, will cost you more here than here. And that just comes down to the specialty nature of the vehicle and what dealers feel they can charge you. Now, you may be able to get charged through your local mechanic, which may be a lot cheaper to service this, and it might bring it back more to a comparable nature. But having said that, servicing through the dealer, like for like, this is more than likely going to cost you more, and probably significantly more than an Aussie dual cab. No cap price servicing, as far as I know, with either Silverado or Ram, although most Aussie dual cabs will have some sort of cap price servicing offer, which is worth taking into account in your cost of ownership if you're getting it serviced by the factory dealer. But servicing, and also when it comes to time to break down, one of the biggest problems that I see that owners of US trucks have is something breaks, it's something unusual, and it may be a common fault, but the dealer hasn't seen it before, or it's something that nobody's seen before apparently, and their vehicle is out of action for extended periods of time, and they get very, very frustrated with it, or they're asked to live with the problem until they can figure out a solution, or they end up going back multiple times trying to get the same problem sorted out, and it detracts quite significantly from their ownership experience. So you do want to be aware of that. These are specialty vehicles, and there's not a widespread dealer network, and that's going to come potentially at a cost to you. The other thing is if you're buying used, and I've experienced that as well. And it's not just these vehicles. When I used to drive other grey imports around, you have a problem, you want to get someone else to fix it for you because either it's beyond your expertise or you don't have time to deal with it. You take it to an auto electrician or a mechanic. This is the problem. Will you fix it? What is it? Oh, it's this. Oh, that's an import. I don't want to touch it. What is it? It's a Dodge Ram. If you've got an older one, if you've got a current one, I've got a Ram or I've got an F-250. Yeah, you might want to take that to somebody who knows those trucks. They're things that people haven't necessarily seen before. And the mechanic or the auto elec or whoever it might be might not be willing to have a go at it, so they push it back to you to take it to someone else, and that can be a problem either if you're away from your dealer network or you've bought a used one and there's no necessarily reason to go back to the dealer and you're not near one. Where do you go? You go to the person that you've always used and they don't want to deal with it, and you end up back in the dealer network who might charge you an arm and a leg. They're specialty vehicles, specialty parts. I've seen a few people commenting on costs of things that aren't, massively unique parts, stuff like broken rear vision mirrors, busted tail lights, broken headlight, things that are fairly, things that can break quite easily in the course of owning a vehicle, and almost had to be resuscitated when the dealers told them what the replacement part is worth. And then for some reason, because of the angle of the mirror or something compared to the US version, they have to buy the Australian variant, or they'd have to buy the US part and significantly modify it. And that's not a palatable solution for them. So outside of things like servicing, things that you might, if you want to do yourself, if you're a home mechanic, or just general consumables, one thing I suppose you would look at if you're buying one of these compared to one of these, your consumables in Australia. If you're buying consumables in Australia, they're going to be a lot more expensive generally. I've quoted a lot of different parts for this, like parts, not like filters and things, not consumable products, but replacement parts. Might be injectors, shock absorbers, stuff like that. Which are consumables in a fashion, but they're actually expensive replacement parts. Quoting them in Australia, I've seen some horrendous markups, but that's what you pay for the convenience of having that part in Australia right now. I have no problem with that. So if you want to go and get a new set of, I've got Bilstein 5100s in this truck, and the markup to buy those, a full set of 4 in Australia, was about 400% on what I got them landed from the US to my door for. But that's the price you pay for having it in stock, available at a place you can go and pick them up right now. So I have no problem with that markup, but if you want the parts in Australia, you don't want to wait about bringing them into the country or want to support an Australian business. That's all good stuff to do. But I found, like for like, shock absorber for this, shock absorber for that. The pricing on this is a lot more expensive. But consumables, oil filters, fuel filters, air filters, not too bad in Australia compared to the Hilux. They're pretty similar. If you can buy them in bulk or bring them in, I've not found a huge difference outside of buying them bulk in Australia or buying them bulk overseas. A little bit of difference, not a massive difference. So I wouldn't necessarily, pursue that. I've been quite happy getting all my filters and stuff in Australia, and they've been pretty close. You use a lot more oil in this, a lot more automatic transmission oil, a lot more diff oil. They're bigger vehicles. But the engine oil you're using, there's 7 litres about in this, and there's almost 12 litres in this. So a lot more oil. Does it break the bank? No, but it's another thing that you're going to pay for when it comes time to service it. The service interval in this is astonishing. Although speaking to some people recently, the service interval on the current models is greatly reduced. The service interval on this is massive. Absolutely massive. It's about, under normal conditions, say circa, it's not exactly right because all the intervals are in miles and we're obviously in kilometres, but about 25,000 kilometres under normal use, 15,000 kilometres under heavy use, or say 12.5 under heavy use. That's a pretty good service interval. Whereas, with the modern ones, it's a little bit less than that, but comparing these two, that's a massive interval compared to the normal service interval on this truck, which is every 10. So the normal use interval on the Hilux is every 10. The severe use interval on this truck's about 12.5. But I service it every 10 anyway, so I don't get a saving on that. But if you went completely by the Cummins book, you could save yourself some money there. Although, as I said, the modern variant of this truck, the service interval has come back a long way. But still quite comparable with something that you buy in Australia. Tyres and other consumers, tyres, you're going to have to get tyres that are spec'd for the load that this is carrying, particularly if you're going to carry heavy loads. So light truck tyres might be what you end up buying with the LT designation. You might get an all-terrain LT or something. That will potentially add a lot to your tyre cost. I've seen a few people lamenting the amount they've spent on tyres on their Ram when it's come to reshod them. If you want to put aftermarket rims on them, some people have lamented the lack of choice. I've got zero interest in putting aftermarket rims on it, so it doesn't really affect me, but it may affect you. In terms of maintaining it, if you're going to do it yourself, it's out of warranty, you want to do it yourself. I'm a home mechanic. I've got some training, mechanical training, so I'm content to service my gear, and I found servicing this thing to be absolutely fantastic. This is good to service. I quite like the Hilux. It's far from the worst vehicle I've had to service. There's some good things that Toyota have thought about, which makes this quite a good vehicle to service. In terms of this truck, the thing I like about it when it comes to servicing is there is no part of this car that I haven't tried to service or whatever, that there hasn't been multiple detailed videos on YouTube or on various Ram forums online that I haven't been able to reference and then implement when it comes to service time, which has been absolutely fantastic. The knowledge bank of information that exists on these trucks to do everything from simple oil filter change to transmission service, injector changeover, head gasket changeover, full brake rebuilds, whatever you want, somebody's done it and they've made a video about it. Whereas with the Aussie spec utes, there's some, but the base of knowledge, the brains trust online on places like YouTube, just isn't as big with one of these to one of these. For example, I rely on my workshop manual for complex tasks on this a lot more so than I need to with this. The workshop manual is just to verify things like torque settings and vehicle specifications to make sure the information in the video that I've just watched is accurate. but that huge amount of knowledge makes this a very easy car to service and maintain, even when it comes to things that perhaps traditionally a home servicing chap might be, not content to do, like dropping your ball joints or changing your injectors over or something like that. It's pretty easy to do when you've got a video right in front of you showing you this is how you do this task. And if the camera angle or the presenter's not exactly precise in their speech, you can check out somebody else and see what they say. So that's a good thing. So overall, I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from owning a Sierra, Silverado, Effie or Ram. They have their place. They can be very, very useful. I like the fact that this has a 2.4 metre length tray, and you just can't get a 2.4 metre length tray on an Australian dual cab unless you do a chassis extension. And if you're going to do a chassis extension on a brand new vehicle, people who offer chassis extensions say, oh, it won't void your warranty because, we're not touching anything mechanical. I've been very keen on chassis extensions. I've gone to all the manufacturers who I would like to own one of their vehicles. I don't want to own all of the current dual cabs, but some of them in Australia have quite appealed to me. I've gone to them at dealer level and at manufacturer level and said, I want to do a chassis extension. Will you warranty it after the chassis extension is done? And they have come back to me, unsurprisingly, with everything from absolutely not to, well, it depends, but we're definitely not going to put it in writing that we're going to cover you. So if I'm going to invest in a new car and I'm immediately going to void my warranty as soon as I drive off the lot, that warranty has a cost and it's built into the new price of the vehicle. And I don't want to pay that premium they build into the price to get the warranty. I'll buy a used vehicle where that premium's not built in, and then I'll do it, because if I'm going to void the warranty anyway, I don't want to pay that premium. That's just me. So, the 2.4 metre length tray or 2.1 circa on the standard box, that has a lot of appeal to me. The 6 seats in this, you can't get 6 seats in one of these. The last utility vehicle in Australia, a dual cab to offer that, was this model Hilux about 2012 to 2015, where they did the Workmate, which was a manual, very basic, very base model that had a front bench seat. That was technically a 6-seater, although you probably wouldn't want to sit in that middle front seat, but it was a 6-seater. That's very unlikely that it's going to return now, I would suggest. So if you want a 6-seater, this is really the only place to go. If you want that long tray and maintain your warranty, this is the only place to go. So they're a good vehicle. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from buying one. They do have their place. You can check out my vehicle on why I bought a 2500, which will detail all of that, some of the differences that I saw, but it's not without its compromise. If you have a need to have all your family in the vehicle, 6 people in it, this isn't an option for you. While you need the tray, I've got to have a tray, I've got to have a ute, and I have to have 6 people in it. A US truck's the only place that's going to give you that in a new truck. If you say, I need a 2.4 metre length tray in a new truck, you're either going to have to do a chassis extension on one of these, or you're going to have to buy one of these. Or 2.1 metre length tray, and I don't want a space cab. You're going to have to do a chassis extension, or you have to buy one of these. If I want to tow 4.5 tonnes or more, this is where you've got to be. But if those things aren't important to you, I'd really be asking the question as to whether you need to go that far. And only you can answer that question. It's not a compromise-free purchase. There are some things that you want to be aware of. There are some things that are going to detract from the ownership experience, but that's true of every vehicle. There's things about this ute. I quite like this Hilux as a vehicle. It's fine, but it has things that annoys me and things that I wish were different. I really enjoy my Land Cruiser, but there's things about it that annoy me and I wish were different. No car is perfect. You've got to pick what's perfect for you. But as I said at the outset of this, they're not a vehicle that's free of compromise. So you just need to know what the compromises are, and you want to go into the ownership of your vehicle with as much information as you can, so that you can make an informed decision. Particularly because this is going to cost you, with all the different pieces, servicing, insurance, registration, fuel, depreciation, cost of capital, All of those things is going to make owning one of these, whichever way you slice it, a lot more expensive in terms of what it actually costs you during the life of the vehicle. It's going to make it a lot more expensive proposition owning one of these compared to one of these. Just in general, that's just going to have to be how it is. And you want to count that cost. You want to make sure that you can look on paper and you can say, yes, this thing's cost me $10,000 in depreciation over the last 12 months, and that's $5,000 or $6,000 or whatever it might be, more than what an Aussie dual cab would have cost me. But I know that, I factored that in, and the car's still worth having. So you just want to be aware of that and factor that in before you go into it. If you're looking to make a decision, check your specifications. Don't rely on your dealer. Do as much research as you can. Make an informed decision. And I hope this video has at least been a little bit helpful to you in your decisions. And I thank you for watching.